I'm Greg Engert, beer director for the Neighborhood Restaurant Group, and this is your craft beer and brewing tip of the week. So we've been committed to beer and food pairing since the beginning. We found it is a great way to expand the experience and enjoyment of craft beer. And we found it was also a great way to just get people to drink craft beer, which is crazy to say now when there's walls and walls of cans in every grocery store. Every single bar seems to have a craft beer list. But going back 15, 20 years, when that wasn't an option, we had to get people to realize that beer wasn't just fizzy yellow alternatives. It wasn't just some kind of low alcohol conveyor of mild intoxication, but rather could be something noble, something with history and stories and narratives behind it. And one of the ways that we did that was just by simply following the lead of wine. Wine had done such a good job of elevating its stature by insisting on being paired with the world's best cuisines, or at least the most known cuisines at the time. And we felt that beer had every opportunity to do that as well. And when we really started to dig into how beer could work with food, in some ways we were shocked with how well it worked, but also with how different it was from wine. Unlike wine, beer is lower in alcohol. I mean, sure, we've had the imperial stouts and the barley wines and the double and triple IPAs that can stretch into the double digits, but thankfully the idea of session beer has never gone away. We still have 4% milds, and we still have 5.5% Weiss beers. Even a 7% hazy IPA is gonna be less intense on your palate when it comes to food pairing and play better with food than your 14, 15, even 16% California cult cab or something like that. So low ABV has been one of the benchmarks of beer. It makes it such a social drink, but it also means that it plays well with a lot of different flavors. We don't have to worry about overwhelming food quite as much as we may have to with some of the bigger wines that were served. Also, beer is carbonated, with the exception of a very few still lambics. All beer has some carbonation level. And carbonation is incredible for the whole experience of beer and food pairing. Another reason why lower ABV beers are so wonderful with food is that they may not overwhelm, but they're also going to not light that fire on your palate of spicy food. A lot of times, stronger beers and wines, bitter beers or tannic wines will kind of light up the heat on your palate. Lower ABV beers, especially with a nice bit of carbonation, can deal really well with spicy food. The other thing that's really cool about beer is that all beer has at least a modicum of residual sweetness, sugar. Very few beers are fermented completely dry. And so that bit of malt sweetness, we find a great compatibility, a complement with so many foods that we encounter. The other thing is that, frankly, beer is cooked, unlike wine or many spirits. I mean, you have to malt grain to make beer. And so the way that we malt grain tells us so much about the way the beer is going to look and the way it's going to taste. If you use a lot of lightly toasted malts, you're going to get a golden beer that has lightly bready flavors. That's going to work really well with something that's been lightly roasted. If you employ malts that have been heated a little bit hotter, maybe for longer periods of time, they start to get amberish in color. They tend to have this kind of toasted melanoidin character that's going to go really well with seared vegetables and seafood and meats. And if you go all the way to like a darker porter or stout, something that's brown to black in color, you're employing a lot of heavily roasted malts. And these are going to have flavors you get from grilling food. So a roasty beer is going to really link up nicely. So those are some ways that beer also works really nicely with food. The last thing about beer that I think is probably the most fascinating is that it is so diverse in its flavor profiles. Far more obviously diverse than any wine out there. You can have beer that is straw golden color, bone dry, light and airy on your palate like a Kolsch. You can have something that's aggressively hopped and extremely bitter with just a little bit of a reddish hue and caramel balance like you get from an old school West Coast IPA. Of course, you can have another IPA that looks nothing like that, that is hazy like a Weiss beer, sweet on the palate with loads and loads of really amazing and inviting fruit aromatics. You can have roasty, chocolatey, coffee-ish stouts and porters. You can have toffee, toasty, nutty, figgy, doppelbocks and barley wines, beers that taste like bacon and mortadella, like the classic Rauch beers of Germany. You can have fruity, spicy Belgian style brews and banana clovey, bubblegum, Weiss beers from Bavaria. And then you can even have beers that are sour or more delicately tart. You can have those that are matured on so much fruit that they look more like juice than they do like beer. Others that are a little bit more balanced and vinous, and some that you would mistake for wine. So whether it's crisp, hoppy, malty, roasty, fruity, spicy, smoky, tart, and or funky, all of this gives us so many different kind of weapons to use when we think about the foods with which we're going to pair. If you're interested in learning more about pairing amazing beer with amazing food, just click the link below.